The sprawling estate of Damien Obiagu was the kind that inspired envy. High walls, a marble-floored mansion, a glistening water fountain, and fleets of exotic cars parked like ornaments. But beyond all the wealth and luxury, behind the thick glass windows and Italian chandeliers, was a silence more deafening than a scream. In a grand upstairs bedroom, Damien sat by the edge of his son's hospital-style bed, staring blankly at the little boy with eyes so bright, yet limbs so still. Chibik, his only child, had never walked a day in his 7 years of life. No amount of money could change that. He had flown doctors from Germany, India, Israel. All had given the same verdict: he may never walk. They used terms like cerebral palsy, neural underdevelopment, muscle stiffness. They spoke as if it were a puzzle with no solution. But to Damien, it wasn't just medical. It was personal. It was failure. It was the one thing money couldn't fix. Damien's wife, Amara, a once elegant woman now frayed by bitterness, had become the mansion's ghost. Once loving, now cold. She spent her days obsessing over image galas, Instagram posts, wine tastings, anything to escape the reality of their child's condition. She blamed Damien for Chibik's state, accused his bloodline of curses, and often reminded him that she gave up her dreams for this pathetic motherhood. Their bedroom was now a war zone of silence. The last time they had touched was 2 years ago. The only thing they shared anymore was a roof, and the sorrow of a broken family. Damien, though cold and controlled in boardrooms, became soft and almost childlike beside his son. He read to Chibik every night, even if the boy stared blankly. He talked to him, prayed for him. He had given the boy a special room filled with toys, hoping one day his son would rise and play. The house was filled with staff, cooks, drivers, guards, maids, yet none dared enter Chibik's room unless summoned. Amara had imposed strict rules. Chibik, she said, was fragile and could not be around low-class germs. She called the maids village rats and treated them like shadows. Behind her expensive perfume and heels was a woman unraveling, clinging to control where she had none. The boy had become more than a child. He was a mirror of their failure. Damien had become a man who barely smiled, barely spoke, barely lived. His company, Obiagu Holdings, still thrived, but his home was slowly dying. And so, with another foreign therapist resigning and Chibik growing more distant by the day, Damien's silent despair deepened. He had no idea that help was about to arrive, not from abroad or the best hospitals, but from a girl whose name he hadn't even heard yet. Ngozi stood at the back of the compound in a worn-out wrapper and a second-hand blouse 3 sizes too big. Her hair was tied in a tired scarf, and her slippers were threadbare. Her eyes, however, held a light that refused to go out, the kind of light forged in the fire of survival. She was just 23, but her soul had seen things many wouldn't survive in 3 lifetimes. As she stood beside the line of newly recruited workers waiting to be inspected, she tried not to tremble. The mansion was unlike anything she had ever seen. The smell of polished tiles and imported furniture reminded her of what could have been. Once, she was destined for greatness. A bright secondary school student in Borno, she had won a scholarship to study engineering in Canada. Her parents had cried with joy. But 2 weeks before her flight, Boko Haram came in the night. Guns, fire, screams. She watched her entire family burn while hiding beneath a corpse in the bushes. By the time soldiers came, it was too late. Her dreams died that night. Her body lived, but her world never recovered. The woman who interviewed her barely looked up. "You. What's your name?" "Ngozi," she answered in a whisper. "Ngozi what?" "Ngozi Maduk." The woman sighed. "Village girl. Can you clean?" "Yes, ma." "Can you follow instructions?" "Yes, ma." "You're assigned to the boys' quarters. Don't talk too much. Don't touch anything unless you're told. And don't make noise near the child. His mother is sensitive." With that, she was dismissed. No one asked where she came from, what she had been through, or what she once dreamed of becoming. To them, she was just another maid, another forgotten soul trying to survive behind the walls of the rich. But God had not forgotten her. Though she didn't know it yet, The same girl who once dreamt of walking graduation stages in Canada was about to teach a billionaire's crippled son to walk. She walked through the servant corridor with her small gonna-must-go bag, carefully placed her meager belongings under a bunk bed, and took a deep breath. That night, while the other maids gossiped and mocked her poor appearance, Ngozi quietly unwrapped a small photo of her family, burnt at the edges, and whispered a prayer. "Mama, Papa, Chibundu, I'm still alive. I don't know why, but maybe this is why." In the distance, she heard a child scream and a woman shouting at a nurse. She didn't know yet, but that child's pain would become her calling. The first time Ngozi entered Chibik's room, he screamed. Not just a startled cry, but a full-blown tantrum. Legs twitching, hands thrashing, his voice piercing like a siren. He pointed at her with wild eyes and screamed, "Go away! Go away! Ugly village girl!" Ngozi froze. She had faced militants, watched her mother burn, buried herself in filth to survive. But something about this small boy's voice, filled with disgust and rejection, pierced deeper than she expected. A nurse ran in and tried to calm the boy, whispering, "He doesn't like strangers. Don't take it personal." But Ngozi had already felt it. That sting of being unwanted again. Amara barged in moments later, already furious. "Who let this maid into my son's room? Have I not said it? I don't want flies near my child." She didn't wait for a response. Her eyes scanned Ngozi from head to toe, with contempt so sharp it could cut glass. "You look at you. Do you think this is a village compound? You think you can charm your way in? If you touch my son again, you will regret the day you were born." Ngozi nodded silently, lowered her head, and left the room. But as she walked away, she didn't cry. She had learned how to store pain in boxes inside her heart, boxes she opened only in prayer. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat outside on a stool, looking up at the stars, remembering a time when her mother called her little light. She hummed the lullaby her mother used to sing. Unknown to her, inside the mansion, Chibik heard it. The soft hum carried through the air vent into his room. He paused. For the first time in days, his tantrum stopped. He stared at the ceiling, blinking. His tiny fingers twitched. His lips moved slightly, as though trying to remember. The melody was strange, but familiar, comforting. That night, he didn't cry in his sleep. Damien, peeking in through the half-open door, as he often did, was surprised to see his son sleeping peacefully. He didn't know the reason, not yet, but something had shifted, something small but powerful, and the seed had just been planted. Night after night, Ngozi continued to hum those soft lullabies beneath her breath. She wasn't trying to reach anyone. She was simply surviving the silence, remembering her mother's voice, grounding herself in something familiar. But within the mansion walls, her voice began to travel in ways she couldn't imagine. Through air vents, beneath doors, into cracks of spaces that wealth couldn't seal. And it found Chibik, the boy who had never known a mother song. While others saw a crippled child with outbursts and violent tantrums, Ngozi saw something different. His eyes were too sharp for a child who didn't understand the world. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was a prison. One night, as she passed by his room, she heard soft tapping. Not loud, barely a sound. She paused, listened again. The tapping continued. She leaned closer and realized it was fingers. Chibik was tapping his fingers on the bed frame, in rhythm with her hum. That discovery changed something in Ngozi. Carefully, cautiously, she began to linger a few seconds longer outside his room. Never intruding, never speaking, just humming. Some nights, she added soft lyrics in her native tongue, fragments of forgotten lullabies. Then one afternoon, she heard her name. Faint, croaky, almost imaginary. Ngozi. She turned slowly, her heart thundering. Chibik was at the edge of his bed, staring at her through the slightly open door. His hand trembled, pointing. "That song, sing it again." She swallowed hard and stepped forward. The nurse beside him was frozen. "Ma'am," she whispered. But Chibik waved her away. "No, her. Let her." The next 10 minutes were quiet. Ngozi stood by the door, singing while Chibik stared at her, his eyes wide. his mouth parted slightly as if trying to remember something lost. For the first time in his life, he didn't scream. He didn't cry. He listened. That evening, Damien came home early and found the nurse standing outside the room with tears in her eyes. "Sir, I don't know how, but your son, he allowed the maid to sing to him. He called her name." Damien stepped in, and what he saw nearly knocked the air out of his lungs. His son, who barely acknowledged anyone, was holding a piece of cloth in his hands, watching Ngozi like she was a warm light in a freezing world. Damien said nothing, but his fingers tightened into fists. 1,000 thoughts ran through his mind. Who was this girl? What was it about her voice? He couldn't place it, but in that moment, he knew one thing. Something had begun. And for the first time in 7 years, he saw a flicker of hope. Over the next week, Ngozi was unofficially reassigned to help watch over Chibik. Not by Amara. She remained vehemently opposed, but by Damien's silent command. He didn't say it aloud, but everyone understood. If the boy responded to her, let her stay. And so Ngozi began to spend brief supervised periods with Chibik. She didn't try to force anything. No medical tools. No pressure. Just small things. She brought him beads and asked him to sort colors. At first, he flung them away, but the next day, he arranged 2 red ones before tossing the rest. She would tell him stories from her childhood, funny tales of goats chasing children during yam festivals. She would exaggerate and fall dramatically to make him laugh. It worked. A small chuckle. Then a full giggle. Then one day, he clapped. That single clap made Damien drop his coffee cup from shock. The sound was beautiful. Gradually, Ngozi began including small stretches in their games. "Let's stretch the legs of the soldier so he can march," she would say, bending the toy's limbs while casually guiding Chibik's. She never said the word exercise. It was always play. "Let's kick the ghost under the bed," or "let's teach our legs how to dance again." To anyone watching, it looked like innocent nonsense. But to Ngozi, it was intentional. And the boy responded. He didn't walk, not yet, but his legs stopped shaking when touched. His stiff muscles began to ease slightly. The household began to notice small changes. He began asking for her, smiling, eating more, laughing, even calling her Auntie Zizi, a nickname he gave her himself. The other maids mocked it behind closed doors, but some began watching her with awe. Damien began to spend more time observing, often pretending to read a newspaper in the corner of the room. He was no fool. He recognized discipline when he saw it. Ngozi had a gift, not just of care, but of teaching. She wasn't just lucky, she was educated. He began to ask subtle questions. "Where are you from? What did you study?" She would always downplay it, uncomfortable. But one day, she slipped. She corrected the pronunciation of a French word in one of Chibik's cartoons. "You speak French?" Damien asked, startled. She looked down. "I was meant to study in Canada before the village attack." That was the first time Damien heard her story. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't shake. But the pain was thick beneath every word. That night, Damien went into his study and sat quietly for hours. Something about Ngozi's resilience stirred something in him, a conviction he hadn't felt in years. Amara had noticed it too. She watched from the shadows as her son laughed in ways he never had before. But instead of feeling joy or relief, her heart twisted with jealousy and rage. She didn't care that her son was happier. She cared that it wasn't because of her. It wasn't some $20 million therapist from Dubai. It wasn't her, or even the elite specialists she paraded before the press. It was Ngozi, the maid who once cleaned the backyard toilet. The same girl she had once called a village cockroach. The idea that a girl from the gutters could do what her money couldn't was an insult Amara could not stomach. And so the war began. Silent, but lethal. It started with passive remarks. "Why is she always in his room? Why does she dress like that in front of my child?" Then it escalated. Amara accused Ngozi of being too close, forming bond with my son like she owns him. Damien dismissed her at first. He was too focused on the boy's recovery. But Amara grew louder. "She's trying to replace me. Can't you see it?" Damien snapped. "Replace you? You haven't held your son in a month. Ngozi sings to him, makes him laugh. When was the last time you even asked if he was happy? That was the beginning of the final crack in their marriage. Amara stormed out of the house and returned days later with makeup artists and photographers. She posted pictures with Chibik online, using a pillow to prop him up, trying to make it look like he was improving because of her. But the boy winced the entire time. He hated the flashes, the strangers. He cried and reached for Ngozi. That moment, captured by a staff member's phone, went viral within their circle. A sick child reaching for a maid, not his mother. The shame burned Amara's soul. Fueled by wounded pride, Amara confronted Ngozi in the kitchen one morning. You think because you're making my son smile, you belong here? Listen to me carefully. This is not your fairy tale. You'll always be what you are, a war refugee in rags. I will see to it you're removed from this house before you poison my child with your peasant energy. Ngozi stood still. She didn't speak. But the head cook, who had grown fond of Ngozi, pulled her aside afterward. You've touched that boy's soul. Don't let her touch yours with bitterness. That night, Ngozi prayed silently in her small room. God, I didn't come to take anyone's place. I only want to help him walk. I know I'm not supposed to dream big again, but if there's still purpose left in me, please let me see it through. In the mansion, storms were brewing, but a miracle had already started to bloom. While Ngozi quietly continued her mission to help Chibik walk, bitterness festered in the hearts of others within the mansion walls. The other maids, especially Chinelo, the chief domestic staff, watched her with narrowed eyes. They couldn't understand how a girl who came in wearing threadbare wrappers was now being spoken to by Oga Damien himself. Envy masked itself as gossip and soon became action. She thinks she's better than us, Chinelo would whisper. Always forming holy. Wait, we'll see who she really is. They began a silent campaign, hiding cleaning tools, mixing up her tasks, blaming her for small mistakes. But Ngozi endured it all without complaint. She had survived worse. She knew what it meant to be hunted, to sleep in the forest with gunshots in the distance. These were just whispers. Still, the weight of their hatred pressed on her shoulders daily. She could feel their eyes, their plotting silence, their fake greetings. But she pressed on for Chibik. Then came the lie that nearly broke her. Chinelo, desperate to ruin Ngozi, claimed Ngozi had stolen Madame Amara's diamond brooch. It was one of those expensive, almost ceremonial pieces, barely worn but heavily guarded. Chinelo placed it beneath Ngozi's mattress and later cried foul, pretending to have accidentally found it while checking the rooms. The house was thrown into panic. Amara, ever eager for an excuse to disgrace Ngozi, summoned everyone and slapped her across the face before a gathering of staff. Thief! You village rat! So you're using your pity face to steal. Ngozi stood still, her face red and stinging. She couldn't speak. Not because she was guilty, but because the shame, the weight of it all, reminded her too much of the night her village was burned. She was blamed then, too, for surviving. Now again, she stood alone. Even the staff who had seen Ngozi as kind looked away. Silence became complicity. Damien arrived amidst the chaos, demanding to know what was happening. Chinelo, with fake tears, narrated the discovery. Amara insisted Ngozi be arrested. But Damien, sensing something was off, asked for the CCTV to be reviewed. Chinelo panicked and tried to protest, saying it was probably just misplacement, but the damage was done. In the end, no arrest was made. The brooch was returned, but the suspicion remained. Ngozi was told to keep her distance from the boy until further notice. Chibik cried for her, cried until his nose bled, but his mother locked his room and brought in another maid to distract him. The house fell back into coldness. That night, in her tiny servant room, Ngozi stared at the ceiling and whispered to herself, "They killed my family, they burned my home, but they won't kill my soul." She didn't cry. She had long stopped shedding tears. She just held on to one thing, her promise to help that child walk. In the silence of his home office, Damien sat with his head in his hands. His marriage was collapsing. His son's progress had hit a wall. And the only person who had brought hope was now the subject of scandal. Something didn't sit right with him. Ngozi didn't behave like a thief. She was humble, too reserved, too focused. He had once watched her walk past a bundle of cash one of the staff had dropped without even flinching. And the look in Chabik's eyes whenever she walked into a room, it wasn't something that could be faked. It wasn't just affection. It was trust. A rare kind of trust that a child with 7 years of silence had only begun to show. Damien knew children sensed energy better than adults. If Chabik opened up to Ngozi, there was something pure in her. But he was torn. His wife was raging, threatening to divorce, embarrassing him in front of family friends. The board of his company was already gossiping. Damien can't even control his own household. He decided to investigate. Quietly, he called his personal IT technician and asked for CCTV backup. Not just of the day the brooch was found, but of the entire week. What he found shattered his trust in the people he had fed and clothed. Chinello had clearly planted the brooch, caught on silent footage at midnight, tiptoeing into Ngozi's room. Damien's hands shook with rage. The betrayal stung. He had hired Chinello when she had nothing, paid for her daughter's WEC, even covered her husband's surgery once. And this was how she repaid him? But even more than that, he felt guilt. Guilt for not trusting Ngozi. Guilt for allowing Amara's venom to infect the truth. He had failed the only person trying to help his son. Still, instead of confronting anyone directly, he chose to wait. He wanted to see who else was involved. Who else smiled in his presence while stabbing truth in the back. The more he watched Ngozi in the footage, the more he saw her differently. The way she gently helped Chabik sit up. The way she laughed softly even when the boy pulled her braids. The way she wiped drool from his mouth and whispered, "You're going to walk, my prince. One day, I'll clap as you run." Damien found himself sitting back in his chair, staring at her frozen image on the screen. He didn't know how to explain it, but Ngozi had become more than a maid. She was hope in human form. A walking reminder of resilience, of survival, of compassion. And now, she was being eaten alive by the very house she helped heal. Damien stood, pulled on his kaftan, and walked into the night air, his heart heavy. One way or another, he would find a way to make things right. But first, he had to test the loyalty of his household, and the limits of his wife's hatred. Amara was hosting a small dinner party. It was her way of proving to the Lagos elite that all was well, that she was still Madame Obayagu, wife to a billionaire, mistress of her household, and mother of a miraculously improving child. She invited press photographers, influencers, and a few wives of politicians. She dressed Chabik in a tuxedo, had him propped with pillows, and ordered the new maid to hold him just right for photos. When he cried, she slapped his hand and whispered, "Smile or you'll embarrass me." The child wept silently. Ngozi watched from a corner, dressed in her plain brown uniform. She had been allowed back inside the room, not as caregiver, but as furniture. "Stand there and don't move," Amara had hissed earlier. But Chabik's eyes kept darting to Ngozi, his fingers twitching for her hand. Midway through the party, a politician's wife noticed the way the boy was leaning toward the girl in the corner. "Who's that?" she asked. "He seems to like her." Amara laughed, too loud. "That? Just the housemaid. You know these poor girls, always looking for pity attention. Her family died in a terrorist attack. Now she walks around acting like she's the Virgin Mary." Some of the guests chuckled. Another asked, "Wait, that's the one who helped the boy stand once, right?" Amara rolled her eyes. "Please." The boy twitched, "And now everyone thinks she's Jesus. Watch, next they'll say she healed him. I should have just left her in the gutter where we found her." Her words dripped like acid across the room. Ngozi stood still, her face burning with shame. She wasn't supposed to cry, but her chest hurt. Not from the insults, but from the memory. The way her mother screamed when the militants came. The smell of burning bodies. The silence of the aftermath. What no one realized was that Damien had walked in halfway through that exchange. He had heard everything. The laughter. The mockery. The cruelty. And something snapped inside him. He didn't speak. He simply walked up to Ngozi and said, in a voice loud enough for the room to hear, "Ngozi, come with me. Please." The room fell silent. Amara's face froze. Ngozi followed in confusion. Damien led her outside, into the garden where Chibik had once been carried for sunlight. He looked at her and whispered, "I know everything. The footage. The lies. I know. I'm sorry." And for the first time, Ngozi broke. She fell to her knees and wept. Not because of his words, but because someone finally saw her. Truly saw her. And that moment became a turning point. For her. For Damien. For the boy. The quiet war had begun, and redemption had just started to whisper its name. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind when even the breeze tiptoed through the garden. Damien had sent most of the staff on errands, partly to clear the space, partly because he could no longer stomach the toxic energy filling his home. In the sunlit garden, Chibik sat propped up on a fur mat, his legs stretched in front of him, limp but not lifeless. Beside him, Ngozi knelt quietly, holding a little carved wooden toy in her palm, a soldier with a missing leg. "This one's like you," she whispered gently. "But you know what? Even with one leg, he stood. So if he could stand, you can too." Chibik smiled faintly but said nothing. He had grown more expressive in recent weeks, not with words, but with gestures, eye contact, and laughter. Ngozi had learned to read his silences. She gently touched his feet. "Let's teach your legs how to say hello to the ground again, Chibik nodded. She wrapped her fingers around his ankles and began guiding them into a playful rhythm. Nothing forceful, just gentle flexes. "Stretch, hold," she repeated, making it a game. Then she stood, stepped behind him, and with delicate care, placed his hands against her palms. "Okay, soldier boy. Time to rise. We'll try together. I won't let go." His hands trembled, his knees buckled, but she felt something shift. He pressed down. His legs bent awkwardly, but something clicked. It wasn't stable. It wasn't graceful. But it was real. Chibik pushed, trembling, gasping, grunting, and for 2 miraculous seconds, he was standing. His small frame shook like a reed, his legs bowed, but he was upright. Then he collapsed into Ngozi's arms, breathless and sweaty. But he laughed. A loud, hearty laugh that rang across the garden like a bell. Damien, watching from the window, with tears streaking silently down his face, dropped to his knees in awe. Later that evening, when Ngozi carried Chibik back inside, the house felt different. It was no longer the mansion of sorrow. It had become a place of promise. Chibik kept repeating, "I stood. I stood. I stood," to anyone who would listen. The staff, once cold, now watched Ngozi with mixed emotions, awe, jealousy, confusion. Even the cook whispered, "God day, inside that girl." But Amara said nothing. She had watched from behind the curtain, rage boiling in her chest. The one thing she had failed to achieve in 7 years had happened in her absence. A war refugee had succeeded where specialists had failed. And now, all eyes turned to Ngozi. The whispers began again, but this time not of mockery, but of destiny. And as night fell, Ngozi knelt beside her tiny mattress, hands lifted, tears falling. "Lord, I saw him stand. I saw him. Thank you. Even if this is all I ever do in life, it is enough." The next few days were filled with cautious joy. Damien began working from home more often, canceling meetings and board appearances just to be present during Chibik's sessions with Ngozi. He bought new mats for the garden, imported physiotherapy tools, and built a shaded area where Ngozi could guide Chibik's stretches. But what stunned him most wasn't just the boy's physical improvement. It was his spirit. Chibik had become more talkative, playful, and curious. He asked questions, laughed without fear, and even began reading again. He would reach for books and say, "Read this, Auntie's easy," and Ngozi would happily oblige. The boy had found not just his legs, but his light. Damien started taking notes, documenting each day's progress. At night, he'd sit in his study and weep quietly, overwhelmed by gratitude and guilt. How could he have almost let this miracle walk out of his house? Ngozi, however, remained humble. She never bragged. She refused expensive gifts Damien offered and declined requests to take a break. She worked harder than ever, not for money or recognition, but because something in her spirit had been reignited. For years, she had believed her destiny was stolen in that night of fire and blood. But now, she saw purpose in her pain. Every time Chibik stood, she stood too. Every time he took a step, a part of her soul reclaimed what had been lost. Even when other staff began warming up to her, offering her food, helping with tasks, she remained focused. "I'm not here for comfort," she once said to the cook. "I'm here for completion." But as her star began to rise, so did the shadow behind her. Amara watched with tight lips, her hands shaking when she poured wine, her nights sleepless. Her hatred had grown deeper, now rooted in fear. Amara knew her grip on Damien was slipping. For years, she had controlled the narrative. The grieving mother, the sorrowful wife, the victim of a cursed marriage. But now everyone in the house, even Damien himself, saw Ngozi as the one bringing healing. That terrified Amara. She began making subtle moves, texting bloggers, leaking false rumors that Ngozi was seducing Damien, that she had bewitched the child with dark charms. She called her pastor, paid for private prayers, and instructed one of the guards to watch the maid closely. She wasn't just envious anymore, she was desperate. One morning, while Chibik was eating, she told him coldly, "She's not your mother. Don't get too close. She'll leave like everyone else." The boy's smile vanished. He went quiet. That afternoon, Ngozi found him unusually withdrawn. He wouldn't sing, wouldn't stretch. She knew something had happened. When she asked him gently, he whispered, "Mummy said you'll leave. Like my old doctor." Ngozi swallowed hard. "I'm not leaving my prince. Not unless they drag me out." But deep down, she knew war was coming. Amara could no longer take it. Watching her husband look at another woman with admiration, seeing her son light up at someone else's voice, it gnawed at her ego, her pride, her position. So she orchestrated the ultimate betrayal. One morning, she called Chinello, who had since been quietly trying to redeem herself, and offered her N200,000 to perform one final task: poison Chibik's food and ensure Ngozi was blamed. Chinello hesitated, terrified. But greed and desperation made her fold. Amara handed her a crushed sedative, strong enough to induce vomiting and dizziness. "Just sprinkle it in the food. We'll handle the rest." And so it happened. Lunch was served. Ngozi was in the garden washing mats when Chibik began to retch violently. The screams echoed through the mansion. Staff ran. Damien burst through the hallway barefoot, panic in his eyes. Chibik's lips were pale, his body trembling. He was rushed to the hospital. And when the doctor asked, "What did he eat?" all fingers pointed to Ngozi. Amara cried crocodile tears, wailing in public that this evil girl was sent to destroy her family. The head maid swore she saw Ngozi near the food tray. The cook, unsure, said nothing. Damien, overwhelmed, demanded the CCTV footage again, but Chinello had unplugged the device hours before the poisoning. There was no footage, no proof, just suspicion. And so Ngozi was summoned. Her heart raced as she stood before the man whose trust she had earned, now staring at her like a stranger. "Did you touch the food?" Damien asked. "No, sir," she said softly. "I swear on everything I have left in this world." But her voice shook, not because she was lying, but because she could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe her. Amara screamed, "Arrest her. Get her out of here before she kills the boy." And just like that, it happened. Damien, the man who once said he owed her everything, looked away. "Ngozi, I think it's best you leave. For now." Ngozi couldn't speak. Her lips trembled. She turned slowly, picked up her worn slippers, and walked out. No bag. No protest. Just silence. Behind her, Chibik wailed in the hospital bed, "Auntie Zizi, don't go. Don't go." But she didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because her heart had shattered. Again. The first time was in Borno, when her family burned. The second time was now, when love and progress collapsed in the hands of envy. She walked barefoot through the mansion gates, down the long dusty road, whispering one sentence over and over: God, if I did all this just to be thrown away again, then please, let this be the last time I ever hope. Ngozi didn't cry as she left the gates of the Obayaga mansion. Her eyes remained dry not because it didn't hurt, but because the tears had run out long ago. During the night her family was slaughtered in the Borno attack. During the cold mornings she slept beneath bridges in Kano. And during the moments she buried her dreams with her hands shaking and her spirit hollow. Now once again she was being cast out, not for doing wrong, but for daring to hope. The betrayal stung deeply, especially coming from Damien. He had looked at her like she mattered, like she was someone. And yet, the moment doubt crept in, he let her fall. No questions, no fight, just silence. That silence screamed louder than words. It reminded her of the military trucks that arrived too late in her village, sirens wailing after everything had already been lost. She walked until her legs gave out, past high-end gates and fancy cars that sped by without slowing. Her body ached, but her mind replayed only one thing: Chibik's voice screaming her name. That little boy had become her healing. Helping him walk made her believe in purpose again, and now he was gone too. Her feet finally stopped at the edge of Ajagunal, a congested slum full of the forgotten and displaced. There, among the battered shacks and wooden stalls, she found herself once again surrounded by faces just like hers, faces that had survived war, rape, famine, and betrayal. Ngozi collapsed by a concrete wall, and within minutes, a young woman rushed to her. "Ngozi, is it you?" My God! It was Miriam, another Borno survivor. She had been 14 during the attack, and she and Ngozi had escaped together before being separated during resettlement. The embrace between them broke the dam in Ngozi's chest. She wept. Finally. That night, Miriam took her in a one-room shack where 3 other women slept on flattened cartons. No mattresses, no power, just breathing, pain, and sisterhood. They didn't ask for details. They knew. The pain needed no explanation. Ngozi lay in the darkness, staring at the rusted zinc roof, whispering softly, "I was almost there. I was almost useful." Miriam squeezed her hand. "No, Ngozi. You are useful. You changed something. Maybe not in them, but in yourself." Outside, the sound of street traders and generators filled the night. Inside, a woman who had once dreamed of studying engineering abroad now shared a spoon of rice with 4 other refugees. Yet, even in that brokenness, something flickered in her chest, not quite hope, but not complete defeat either. Maybe God had not turned away. Maybe he was waiting, just as she was, for the next rising. Back in the mansion, chaos simmered beneath the marble floors. Chibik had stopped eating, stopped laughing, stopped moving. His progress evaporated within days. The boy who once stood with joy now lay curled in a fetal position, silent and withdrawn. He asked for Ngozi every hour, and when told she was gone, he began to scream, piercing cries that echoed through the corridors. Amara ordered doctors, priests, even psychologists, but nothing worked. Damien grew restless. He had thought removing Ngozi would restore peace. Instead, it destroyed the last thread of joy in his son's heart. The boy refused food, rejected medication, and even slapped the new maid who tried to feed him. Damien watched helplessly, his eyes bloodshot, his suits wrinkled from sleepless nights. And in the midst of this, Amara, dressed in pearls and red lipstick, had the audacity to host a prayer group in the garden. "Let's pray against demonic influences," she declared, casting glances at the gate, as if Ngozi's memory still lingered there. But the truth always has a way of clawing its way to the surface. One of the kitchen boys, Emmanuel, had seen Chinello tampering with the CCTV wires. At first, fear kept him silent. But when he overheard Chinello bragging on a call about finally teaching that saintly Ngozi a lesson, he knew he couldn't keep quiet. He snuck into Damien's private study, trembling, and confessed everything. Damien listened, at first unbelieving, then horrified. He retrieved the backup drive himself and personally reviewed the log. There it was, Chinello slipping something into the food tray, then laughing with Amara an hour later. His hand shook. He dropped the glass of water he was holding, shards scattering across the floor. For a moment, he sat in stunned silence. Then rage replaced regret. He stood, walked into the parlor, and called for Chinello and Amara to join him. "Now we end the games," he said, voice cold. What followed was an explosion. Chinello broke into tears and confessed everything. Amara tried to twist the story, claiming it was only a harmless sedative, meant to calm the boy down. But it was too late. Damien's voice thundered through the house. "You poison my child to destroy an innocent woman." Amara slapped him in response. "You're in love with that girl," she screamed. "You've made this house a shrine for that orphan." Damien didn't deny it. Not because he was in love, not yet, but because he had found someone who brought light to what Amara only filled with vanity. He called his lawyer. That same night, divorce papers were drafted. Amara was given 48 hours to leave the mansion. When she refused, Damien released the CCTV clip to his family and the company board. Within days, the same society that once praised Madame Obiagu now whispered disgraced witch. Her downfall wasn't loud. It was surgical, clinical, and final. And in the center of the wreckage, Chibik still cried for Ngozi. Chibik's hospital room smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. White sheets, monitors, nurses with blank expressions. But in the middle of it all lay a little boy whose heart had shattered. He didn't speak, didn't eat. His weight began to drop. Even the doctors were puzzled. Psychological trauma, they said. Severe emotional withdrawal. Damien sat by his bedside daily, holding the boy's hand, whispering, "She's not gone forever." But Chibik no longer believed him. The one person who never lied had vanished without goodbye. And so his mind began to protect itself the only way it knew how, by shutting down. He stopped reacting to music, to cartoons, even to his favorite books. He became a silent doll. Damien wept at night, alone in the mansion study, staring at photos of Ngozi and Chibik laughing together. Every image felt like a knife to his chest. He had destroyed the very thing he prayed for. Eventually, Damien stood. He was done being weak, done letting guilt paralyze him. He called his driver, dressed in plain clothes, and asked a single question. "Where do the Boko Haram survivors live in Ajagunal?" The man stammered, "Oga, those places are not safe." Damien didn't flinch. "I didn't ask for safety. I asked for direction." They drove in silence. The moment he stepped out of the SUV and into the slum, people turned. His fine wristwatch and Italian shoes were out of place. But he didn't care. He asked for Ngozi. Many recognized the name. "She day for the shack beside the blue kiosk," a girl said. Damien walked past mud, flies, trash, and smoke until he saw her. Ngozi was seated on a stool, braiding a little girl's hair. When she looked up and saw him, she froze. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Damien knelt. Right there, in the mud. "I was wrong," he said. "I believed lies. I let fear silence truth. But my son, our son, is dying without you." Ngozi's eyes welled with tears. Not from flattery, not from love, but from hearing the words she had longed for her whole life. "I was wrong." She helped him up and nodded. "I'm not coming back for you. I'm coming back for him." Damien nodded, his voice choked. "That's all I'm asking." As they walked back to the car, the women in the slums stood in silence, some wiping tears. One whispered, "She left in disgrace, but look how destiny came to fetch her." The journey back to the mansion was silent, but heavy with meaning. For inside the mansion lay a broken boy, and outside at last came the only woman who knew how to gather broken things and teach them how to walk again. The entire household was in quiet suspense the moment Damien and Ngozi stepped out of the car. The mansion staff froze mid-task. The once dismissed maid, clad in her simple wrapper and dust-covered slippers, now walked through the gates not as a servant, but as a woman sent for. Even the gates creaked a little slower, as if they too understood the gravity of her return. No one said a word. No one dared. Damien walked slightly behind her, humbled, burdened. He had delivered his request. Now he stepped back, letting her light lead. Chibik was in the same room where she had left him, but everything had changed. The boy had grown weaker. His cheeks had sunken. His hair was unkempt, and his eyes Oh, his eyes no longer danced. They were dull, distant, drained. A once shining star dimmed by the absence of love. When Ngozi entered, she didn't speak at first. She knelt beside the bed, gently touching his tiny fingers. "My prince," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You stopped singing without me?" Chibik blinked slowly. His lips parted, but no words came. A tear rolled down his cheek. Ngozi leaned closer, humming the same lullaby that had once coaxed life into his still body. The same melody that survived bullets and fire, passed down from her mother, now revived in her voice. Something shifted. His fingers twitched. His lips trembled. Then he whispered, "Auntie Zizi, you came back." A choked sob escaped her. "I told you, didn't I? I won't leave unless they drag me out. And not even that could stop me." She held his frail body tightly, rocking him as he began to weep in her arms. The entire household stood outside the door, silently watching, and somewhere behind them, even Damien wept. The doctor, who had been standing quietly at the corner, nodded respectfully. "This child doesn't need another injection. He needs her." That evening, Ngozi resumed her care. Not with bitterness, not with pride, but with quiet purpose. She cleaned his face, massaged his legs, spoon-fed him his food, and tucked him into bed. The room was no longer sterile, it was sacred. The walls held stories of betrayal, yes, but also redemption. And as the moonlight poured through the curtains, Chibik, now calm, held her hand and asked, "Will you sing again when I try to walk tomorrow?" Ngozi kissed his forehead. "Not only will I sing, I will dance." And with that, the mansion took its first breath of peace in weeks. The prodigal healer had returned, not with vengeance, but with mercy. And in her, even broken bones began to believe again. It happened on a rainy Sunday. Thunder echoed in the distance, as if the heavens were watching closely. Chibik had been gaining strength again, slowly but surely, with Ngozi's gentle routines and playful stretches. But that day, something was different. The boy woke up unusually energized, his fingers drumming on the bed frame. He looked Ngozi in the eye and said, "Auntie Zizi, today I want to walk. Not just stand. I want to walk to you." Ngozi smiled, but didn't rush it. "Are you sure, my prince?" Chibik nodded with childlike certainty. She stood across the room, just a few steps away, and extended her arms. "Then come. Step by step. I'm right here." Damien stood by the door, fists clenched, his heart racing. Staff gathered in the hallway, eyes wide, breath held. The room fell into sacred silence. Chibik placed one foot on the floor, then the other. He shook. His knees buckled. But this time he didn't fall. His little hands reached for air, then steadied by memory. The memory of nights filled with stories, of laughter, of lullabies. He took a step, then another. The silence broke into gasps. Ngozi's lips trembled, her arms still outstretched. "Come, my prince," she whispered, tears rolling freely. "Just one more." Chibik's legs wobbled, but he pushed forward. 4 steps. 5. Then on the 6th he stumbled forward, not from weakness, but into Ngozi's embrace. The entire room erupted in sobs. Damien dropped to his knees and covered his face. The maids cried. Even the guards watching through the open door silently wiped their eyes. Chibik had done the impossible. He walked. Ngozi didn't celebrate loudly. She knelt on the floor, holding the boy to her chest, her forehead pressed against his. "You did it," she whispered. "You remembered your legs." Chibik, panting, smiled. "I wanted to reach you." Those words stayed with everyone, not just because of what he said, but because of what it meant. It meant the healing wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, proof that love was the greatest medicine. Damien stood slowly, walked over, and knelt beside them. "Thank you," he said to Ngozi, voice hoarse. "You brought my son back. And you brought me back." Ngozi nodded without speaking. Outside, the rain continued falling, but inside the mansion, something had risen. Hope. That moment, captured unknowingly by a staff's phone camera, would later circulate through the city. A boy who had never walked, stepping into the arms of a girl who had nothing but love to give. A miracle born not of riches, but resilience. Amara had heard the news before it reached the tabloids. Someone sent her the video, Chibik walking, the mansion staff crying, Damien holding Ngozi like she was oxygen itself. She watched it in her hotel suite with trembling hands, her wine glass crashing to the floor. No, she whispered. No, not that girl. Not that wretched orphan. She screamed, flinging her phone across the room. The woman who once prided herself on being the face of the Obayaga dynasty had now been reduced to a bitter silhouette in a borrowed robe and fading relevance. She called everyone friends, pastors, influencers, and begged for help. None came. Her influence had died the day the CCTV footage exposed her. The world had moved on, and the headlines were now about the miraculous boy and his mysterious maid. Consumed by spite, Amara did the unthinkable. She disguised herself in a scarf and dark shades and drove back to the mansion in a hired taxi. She barged past the gate, pushing aside the confused security. "I want my son," she screamed. "You can't just erase me." The staff scrambled in panic. Damien came out calmly, with Chibik standing beside him, holding Ngozi's hand. The sight burned Amara. Her son, once dependent on her fabricated sob stories, now stood on his own, smiling at another woman. "You witch." Amara spat. "You used charms on him. You used charms on my husband." Ngozi stood still, holding Chibik close. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Damien's voice rang with steel. "Enough, Amara. This is not your home anymore. Your place in this story ended the day you chose lies over love." But Amara wasn't done. She lunged toward Ngozi. In that split second, Chibik did something no one expected. He stepped in front of her. "Don't touch her," he said, voice calm. "She's my real mummy now." The words struck Amara like thunder. She staggered back, trembling. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Damien stepped forward, taking Chibik into his arms. "You lost him a long time ago," he said softly. "You just refused to notice." With that, the guards escorted Amara out. Her screams echoed, but the mansion did not bend. Doors closed. Silence returned. Inside, Chibik looked up at Ngozi. "Did I protect you?" She smiled, wiping a tear. "Yes, my prince. You protected me, with your voice." That night, for the first time, Damien led a prayer in the living room, not for wealth, but for gratitude. And when he thanked God for Ngozi, no one argued. For even the stones would have cried out in her defense. The video of Chibik walking, captured by a domestic staff's phone, went viral within hours. It wasn't planned. It wasn't staged. It was real, raw, and miraculous. A child once declared medically hopeless had taken steps into the arms of a maid. A maid who, by all social definitions, should never have been in that room. The public couldn't stop talking. Blogs headlined it. "Boy walks after 7 years, not by doctors, but by maid." Others dug deeper. Who is Ngozi Maduk? The woman who healed a billionaire's son. Before long, reporters traced her tragic past. The Boko Haram attack, the lost scholarship, the orphan survival, the miracle at the mansion. Her face appeared on TV, not with makeup or filters, but in her headscarf, holding a boy with wide eyes and a bright smile. And the world fell in love with her, not because she tried to impress them, but because she didn't. Damien, initially hesitant about the publicity, saw its healing power. For once, Ngozi's pain had been validated publicly. She wasn't just a maid. She became a symbol of hope, of resilience, of divine justice. During a press conference hosted at Obayaga Holdings headquarters, Damien did something no one expected. He stepped aside and handed Ngozi the microphone. The room fell into a hush as she stood there, her voice trembling but clear. "I was once told I didn't belong in places like this," she began. "I was once made to believe my story had ended in the fire that took my family. But God used my brokenness to heal someone else's." She paused, looking down at Chibik, sitting in the front row. "This boy, he saved me too." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, but Ngozi remained grounded. She wasn't interested in fame. She only wanted closure. Damien made it official. Before the press and board members, he announced that Ngozi would receive full sponsorship to complete her education, anywhere in the world. But that wasn't all. Ngozi is no longer a staff in my household, he said. She is family. He looked over at her, and for the first time in public, took her hand. My late mother used to say, when God sends help, it doesn't always wear a suit. I now understand. Rumors swirled immediately. Were they in love? Was marriage next? But for Damien and Ngozi, the future didn't need pressure. It only needed healing. Meanwhile, Amara, whose desperate attempts to redeem herself fell flat, left Lagos entirely. Disgraced, abandoned by the elite class she once ruled, she relocated to Enugu to stay with an aunt. Some say she still speaks of the maid who took everything, but others say she finally stopped speaking altogether. Either way, her chapter had closed, and Ngozi's was just beginning. A year later, the world looked different. Ngozi now stood taller, not just in posture, but in spirit. She had enrolled in university again, this time in a prestigious Lagos institution, studying pediatric physiotherapy. Her scholarship had been restored, not through charity, but through earned reverence. Damien had renovated an entire wing of the mansion for Chibik's rehabilitation, and Ngozi oversaw his sessions, even while studying. Chibik had not only learned to walk, he now ran, played football with his cousins, and even danced. His confidence soared. In every family event, he introduced Ngozi as the angel God sent for me. And though people still whispered and speculated about the nature of Damien and Ngozi's bond, neither rushed to define it. They weren't living to fit public timelines. They were living to honor the miracle that brought them together. On the day of Chibik's first school graduation, the boy stood tall in his little blazer, reading a poem dedicated to the woman who taught me to stand. Ngozi sat in the front row, teary-eyed, while Damien proudly clapped beside her. Guests watched, moved by the unlikely journey. After the event, a little girl in a wheelchair approached Ngozi and asked, "Can you help me walk too?" And Ngozi knelt, held her hand, and said, "With God, anything is possible." That evening, as the sun set, the three of them, Ngozi, Damien, and Chibik, took a quiet walk through the same garden where it all began. No cameras, no press, just footprints on the grass and laughter in the air. Damien paused, looked at Ngozi, and asked, "Do you ever wish it all didn't happen? That your life had taken a different path?" She smiled, eyes reflecting the sky. "Sometimes, but if I changed one thing, I wouldn't be standing here." They stopped near the old shaded mat, now faded with time, but preserved like a monument. Chibik ran ahead, laughing. Damien took Ngozi's hand, gently. "Wherever this leads, I want to follow," he said. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. The silence between them held more truth than words ever could. As night fell, the stars came out, and for once, they didn't look like distant wishes. They looked like witnesses. To survival, to grace, to mercy, to love that bloomed not from perfect beginnings, but from broken soil. And in that moment, Ngozi, once a forgotten refugee, once a maid, stood not as a victim, but as a vessel. Her pain had not been wasted. Her story had not been buried. She was no longer the girl who watched her world burn. She was the woman who taught the world how to rise from ashes, one step at a time. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.